The Massachusetts Parole Board is gearing up to hear hundreds of new cases after the state's highest court banned life without parole for people under 21 years old. The change is retroactive, so people who were sentenced when they were minors now have the chance to prove they are reformed and can safely re-enter society. Joining me now is GBH News reporter behind this story, Tori Bedford, and Mara Youkydis, director of the Committee for Public Counsel Services Parole Advocacy Unit. Thank you both so much for being here. So this is a big deal. I mean, this is a decision like this hasn't been made since 2013 when Massachusetts made it so that people under the age of 18 couldn't be, given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. What does this mean, and who does this affect, Sarah?
I mean, it's the first kind of its decision in the nation, and I think something that's really important to recognize is that over the past few years, there's been a lot of task forces looking at brain science and the decision-making for young men and women who have committed crimes when they're younger, been sentenced, and then are spending their entire lives behind bars. And now people are realizing, hey, some of the science proves that maybe they weren't having the best decisions and they're changed people since then. So we need to consider that in our policy making.
Yeah, I mean, this is relatively new neuroscientific research that's just been incorporated into this decision. I spoke with Stephanie Tabashnak, who is at Harvard and helped write the white paper that informed some of this research. And she was saying that, up until really the age of 25, I think she said it was like your frontal lobe's not developed, your decision-making abilities, the influence of peers, right? She said it's like driving a Ferrari with smart car brakes, right? Like, I think that she was even saying that, this decision, your ability in your brain to make these kinds of decisions isn't fully formed until you're 25. So if it was really in line with the science, it could potentially go even higher. But now for CPCS, right, like what does this mean for you, right? Like what is the process in dealing with, I think the state said there were an estimated 200 people who will now be eligible. Some of those people are a lot older as well, and have been serving time already. What's that process going to look like?
Yeah, so there are a little over 200 people who are in this cohort who were 18, 19, or 20 when they committed the crime. And we don't have the exact number of people who would be parole eligible right away as a result of this decision, but it's over 100. So that means that there are at least 100 people who are incarcerated right now who now will have the opportunity to appear before the parole board, and the parole board can decide whether or not they're ready to be released back into society.
Okay, and I think for a lot of people, Suffolk DA District Attorney Kevin Hayden put out a statement to say, like, families who are impacted by this or concerned about this should reach out directly to his office. I think it's important to emphasize as well that this is not a get-out-of-jail-free card, right? So that process, can you talk a little bit about what this will mean?
Absolutely. The parole board takes its responsibility very seriously, and parole release is a complicated process. So what happens now is that we will be working to assign lawyers to everyone who's parole eligible or going to be parole eligible very soon. And then the lawyer and the client will work together very closely to prepare themselves to make sure that they're ready to show the board that the release is compatible with the welfare of society. Through that process, there's the opportunities for families, for the victims' families, and for people who are concerned to be involved. And one way that they do that is that the parole board hearing itself is open to the public, and there's the opportunity for people to testify both in support and against parole. The parole board makes decisions very carefully, and they do grant parole, but they also deny parole. And what happens if they deny parole is that someone then gets a chance to go back to the board some years later when at an interval the parole board decides.
And this is not just like, obviously that is just to have the opportunity for the possibility of getting parole, which is, of course, then you're still serving out your sentence just in the community. And anyone who's deemed too dangerous to coexist in society will not be released.
Will never be released.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
right.
I think that's important to emphasize. Yeah.
Yes, this is not a ticket to freedom by any means.
You have been, in your reporting and speaking with people who are working with people who are incarcerated or, are kind of there's a lot of joy around this as well, I think, for people who directly work with people who are incarcerated and have been looking for other options, or have a really, I think, don't want to be judged by, I think, was it Ruth Greenberg, the attorney, who said that they don't want to be judged by their worst day, right? Like worst mistake, or a mistake they made when they were a teenager, right? Like, what are you hearing about people directly from their clients?
A lot of folks, well, it's only been about a week and a half since the decision came down, but people who are incarcerated started hearing pretty quickly through the grapevine. And Ruth mentioned, and other attorneys mentioned, like, people are elated. Like, there's even family members reaching out to attorneys being like, would my significant other or my son be eligible for this? And if they realize, hey, maybe they will be, it's joy, because these are folks who had been sentenced to life without parole. Like, you're never getting out of prison. And now there's even a small chance that they could be released from prison and serve time in society. So that's like a really big change in perspective, not just for the prisoners, but for their families as well. Right.
And I think she was saying that it's people who have been good for the sake of being good, I guess, or been doing all of the right things and really trying to rehabilitate themselves in the face of, in conditions that are not inherently rehabilitative, right, but just for the benefit of themselves and for their own growth, they will be rewarded first.
Well, I think the order that people are going to be considered to go before the parole board sort of goes with, the parole board is going to be calculating when someone's parole date would have been. And so if someone's like a senior citizen or has been incarcerated for decades, those folks will be considered first to go before the parole board, and then other people will be considered afterward. But I think it's just a tremendous opportunity for people, and I think it's going to be a significant strain on the parole board, but they take plenty of time to consider each case very thoroughly.
And if I may, it's also really interesting. We can't really predict who's going to go first or how they're going to go, because while we'll be assigning counsel as soon as possible, people may have reasons that they want to take their time. So some people will want to retain experts, forensic psychologists or social workers, social service advocates, to make sure their release plan is really strong. So at the end of the day, we'll see who goes first, but we're not really sure yet.
That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't considered how they would really want to be able to make the best case. If we can just quickly talk about the strain on the parole board, I mean, is this going to be something, this isn't going to happen overnight, right? Like, what are we looking at in terms of?
We're going to have some people in the group who are going to feel really strongly about going as soon as possible. So we may see some hearings in the first few months. Many people are going to want to work closely with their lawyer too. They've been incarcerated for decades. Some of them are in their 80s, and they're going to be working and deciding what's right for them. So I don't have a crystal ball about this, but I'm thinking that probably in 6 months from now, we're going to see a lot more people starting to schedule hearings. But we might see some pretty soon.
Okay, that's crazy to think about people in their 80s who.
A lot of these parole hearings before parole board they're scheduled weeks and months out, so they already have a full roster. And in the past year, there's also been more clemency requests and also termination of parole requests that are on their table. So the real question is, like, will these be backlogged or not? Like, how are they going to prioritize these? Will they need additional parole board members? Will that even matter? And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Right, and is it even a possibility to bring in additional resources for the parole board? So we'll see. All right, thank you both so much for being here. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.